What if I told you that one bold man stood up and said, "Enough, I will not wear their crown of hypocrisy"? This is not fiction. This is not a dream. This is history unfolding before our very eyes. It was the 31st of July, 2025. The city of Oslo, Norway, was calm as usual. The cobblestone streets shone under the summer sun, and diplomats in their crisp suits prepared to announce to the world the next great honor of peace. But just as the microphones were polished and the speeches were rehearsed, something unexpected happened. Something so bold, so fiery, so unthinkable, that it would forever change the meaning of honor and recognition. Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim Traoré, stood before the world and did the unthinkable. He rejected the Nobel Peace Prize. Not politely, not with a rehearsed excuse, but with thunder in his voice. He said, "I do not need a hypocritical award to legitimize manipulated justice. I reject with contempt any title handed out by those who built unjust borders, drained the lifeblood of weaker nations, and dared to call it peace." His words were not just a refusal. They were a roar, a lightning strike that tore through the sky of global politics. The audience gasped, cameras clicked, translators stumbled. The air was electric with disbelief. A president from one of the poorest nations on earth had stood up and declared war not with guns but with truth. At first, the world thought it was just a stunt. A young leader seeking attention, they whispered in Washington, in Paris, in London. But they were wrong, because just days later the storm grew louder. From across the Atlantic, in the heart of America, another voice rose, one no one expected. Barack Obama, former President of the United States, former Nobel Peace Prize laureate, a man once celebrated as a symbol of hope, of diplomacy, of peace. He stepped in front of the cameras and delivered words that shook the pillars of Western pride. He said, "When I received the Nobel Peace Prize, I thought it was the greatest honor of my life. But now, seeing Traoré's courage, I realize a bitter truth. I was used as a tool to hide the failures and injustices of global policy. The Nobel was never about peace. It was about control, and today I will return it." A silence followed, then shockwaves. Barack Obama, the man who once embodied the prize, gave it back. The G7 nations went into chaos. Behind closed doors, Western leaders called it betrayal. French officials demanded an apology. Former U.S. President Donald Trump fumed on television and on Twitter, calling Obama childish and a failed leader who was playing into the hands of radicals. Diplomats scrambled. Emergency meetings were called in Brussels, in Washington, in Berlin. But outside those halls of power, something different was happening. In the streets of Bamako, in the markets of Lagos, in the villages of Burkina Faso, people cheered. Across Latin America, students painted murals of Traoré's words. In Asia, activists gathered in universities, debating not just the Nobel but the very idea of global justice. The rejection of the prize was no longer just a moment. It was a movement. For more than a century, the Nobel Peace Prize had been wrapped in gold and prestige. It was the crown jewel of global recognition, the award that could turn a leader into a legend. But Traoré's refusal ripped the mask away. He showed the world that behind the golden medal was a system of manipulation, a system that rewarded obedience to Western power and punished true independence. And when Obama returned his prize, it wasn't just a medal going back into a box. It was the confession of a man who once walked the corridors of the G7, admitting to the world that even he, the most powerful black man in American history, had been used as a pawn. Together, Traoré and Obama lit a fire that no one could put out. Western media tried to spin the story. Headlines screamed, "Reckless African leader rejects peace." Commentators said, "Obama is bitter, he regrets his past." But people were no longer listening. In Burkina Faso, tens of thousands flooded the streets, chanting, "Not your prize, not your justice, we define our future." In Kenya, young activists shouted, "If Traoré can refuse, we can resist too." In Brazil, banners rose, "Peace is not given by the West, peace is built by the people." The fire was spreading. But the story did not stop at speeches and rallies. No, what began as symbolic resistance soon turned into concrete action. For centuries, African nations had been divided by borders drawn in European capitals, by debts imposed by Western banks, by wars fueled by foreign weapons. But now, something new was rising. In Ouagadougou, at a historic summit, Traoré announced the birth of a new African alliance. It was not just a political group. It was a declaration of independence, a coalition of nations ready to say, "Our resources, our dignity, and our future belong to us, not to Paris, not to Washington, not to Brussels." The crowd erupted. Flags waved. For the first time in decades, Africa was not asking for recognition. It was claiming power. And the world trembled. The G7 unleashed its arsenal of soft power. Economic sanctions, media campaigns, political threats. They tried to paint Traoré as a dictator, a dangerous populist, a man who would drag his nation into chaos. But the more they attacked, the stronger he became. Because for every insult thrown at him, millions saw proof of his courage. For every sanction, African nations found new reasons to unite. The Nobel Peace Prize, once a symbol of global honor, had now become a symbol of hypocrisy. Its mask had been ripped away, and in its place stood a new banner: justice, dignity, sovereignty. And then came the ripple effect. In Latin America, leaders began questioning Western awards and institutions. In Asia, scholars proposed new systems of recognition, honors that reflected the struggles of oppressed peoples, not the politics of the powerful. In the Middle East, voices rose. If Obama could admit the truth, then we too must break the chains of silence. And across Africa, the chants grew louder. Traoré refused. Obama returned. The world is waking up. But make no mistake, this awakening was not without cost. The G7 doubled down. Propaganda flooded the airwaves. Old alliances were threatened. Even within the United States, Obama's decision sparked outrage. Some lawmakers called for investigations. Others tried to strip him of privileges granted to former presidents. He was labeled a traitor by some, a hero by others. Yet Obama remained calm. He said, "If speaking truth costs me comfort, then so be it. True peace cannot be bought with silence." And in those words, people saw not a politician, but a man seeking redemption. By now, the story had grown far beyond a single medal. It was about something bigger: the right of nations to define their own dignity, the right of people to question the symbols that had been forced upon them, the courage to say no to the masks of power. In the villages of Burkina Faso, elders told children, "Remember this day. Remember the leader who refused their prize." In universities from Johannesburg to Jakarta, students studied Traoré's speech as a lesson in symbolic resistance. And in the hearts of millions, a new seed was planted: the belief that freedom is not granted, it is claimed. Traoré's words became a valiant cry. We do not ask for permission to be free, we rise to claim it. And suddenly, what once seemed impossible was now undeniable. The world order was shifting.